Hello, everyone. I hope everyone is enjoying their social distancing and staying safe and staying healthy and trying not to go stir crazy as we move into the second week of staying at home. Well, I have missed seeing everyone at school, and this is my first try at voice recording one of my lectures, so please be patient with any glitches or grammar issues or hiccups that may occur. I would much rather be doing this in person with all of you in class than doing it in my living room with just the computer by myself. But let's take a stab at it and see how it goes. So the unit that we are going to be doing is on classification and the different kingdoms that exist. So first I'm going to go over a little bit about classification. So there was an Edpuzzle that I believe I posted on Google Classroom for everyone to watch. Hopefully it made sense. If not, I'm going to run through classification really super fast just to make sure that we kind of understand where we're going with all of the stuff we're going to talk about with the different kingdoms that exist. So for classification, one of the things that they pointed out in the video is that if we're looking at this cute little kitty cat right here, there are lots of different names that you could call it. So most people might call it a mountain lion, they might call it a cougar. If you live in the mountains, sometimes they refer to it as a panther. Okay, that's a little bit weird. Usually when we think of a panther, we think of like a black panther, like Bagheera from the Jungle Book. So the point of classification and scientific naming is to make sure that we're giving these animals a name that always refers to them regardless of regional naming. So whether I want to call it a puma or a cougar or a mountain lion, if I call it its scientific name, then I know exactly what cat we're talking about. So overall, classification involves grouping organisms based on how they are related and based on their evolutionary history. And again, we're going to give them these names in Latin because Latin, when they were coming up with the system, Latin was the language that the educated people of the time knew. So if you were educated, you knew Latin. So we decided to give them their names in Latin. And again, the whole point was to cut down on confusion by giving animals one specific scientific name. So the system that we use to name them is called binomial nomenclature. So it literally means a two-name naming system. And the two names that we're going to use are the genus and the species of the organism. So the genus is the name that is listed first. So if we're looking at this scientific name right here, this is for a wolf, Canis lupus. You'll see that it has two names. The first name that's listed is the genus, and notice that it is capitalized. The second name listed is the species, and notice that it is lowercase. Also notice that it is in italics. So we italicize it because it is a foreign language, Latin. So that's just a grammar thing. So that's how we give them their scientific names. Now, if we also look at the genus, we can tell who is most related in an evolutionary sense. So here we have our Canis lupus, and over here we have our Canis familiaris. So they are both in the canine group. Okay, so they have a Canis genus. So that shows that they are closely related in an evolutionary sense. So binomial nomenclature was created by this guy in the 1700s named Carolus Linnaeus, and he came up with this ranking system of classification, a hierarchy system. So the biggest level is the kingdom. So these are the things that we're going to be talking about, like animals and plants and bacteria. So that's the big level, kingdom. After that one comes the level of phylum, class, order, family, and then the last two are the ones that we use to give them their scientific name, their genus, and their species. So by the time you get down to species, you know exactly which organism you're talking about. So we could say, yeah, it's in the animal kingdom. Well, there's a lot of animals, but if I specifically say Canis lupus, then we know we're talking about specifically a wolf. Okay, so species gives you your most specific level, your identification of that organism. Now, a way to remember this is King Philip came over from Geneva, Switzerland. So it's just kind of a silly little mnemonic device. You are welcome to make up your own as well. Now, since classification is also called taxonomy, as you learned in that video, each one of these levels is called a taxon. So order is a taxon, family is a taxon, etc. So now we're going to start talking about kingdoms and domains. So we just mentioned that Linnaeus had this hierarchy system that started with kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Well, they also introduced something called a domain, which is higher than the level of a kingdom. So it's more inclusive. So it actually goes domain and then kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. Just a little bit of history about how we came up with the kingdoms. So again, Linnaeus was around back in the 1700s. Now in the 1700s, things were pretty simple. There were only 2 kingdoms. If you moved, you were an animal. If you didn't move, you were a plant. Pretty simple. In the 1900s, we have better microscopes. So now we can see this other group emerging right here called Protista. They were microscopic. They were just kind of swimming around under the microscope. So we decided to add them in as something different, not plants, not animals, something microscopic. Well, in the 1950s, we're able to differentiate between all of those different things swimming around underneath the microscope. So we find out that this Protista group that we had, well, some of them had a nucleus, some of them didn't have a nucleus. So we broke the ones that didn't have a nucleus into this group called Monera, and that was your bacteria group. We also realized that fungus do not photosynthesize like plants do, so they become their own kingdom as well in the 1950s. So now we had kingdom, animal, plant, plant, animal, protist, fungus, and Monera. So our 3 domains that we're going to put all of our kingdoms into are bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. Okay, so if we think about the word archaea, it kind of sounds like the word archaic, which means old. So the archaea are kind of the most ancient organisms on Earth. We think they're probably some of the first ones to evolve, and they're a special kind of bacteria. So they are prokaryotes. Now, today we have 6 kingdoms in total. So we broke those bacteria kingdoms up even more, those bacteria groups. So the bacteria got broken up into eubacteria and archaebacteria. So that used to be the group we called the Monerans, but now they are separate, the eubacteria and the archaebacteria. And notice that they're both bacterias. Now, the rest of them are the ones that we have been studying for a long, long time, since back in the 1950s. We've got our protists, the fungus, the plants, and of course, the animals that we are all familiar with. So I'm just briefly going to run through the highlights of each one of the different domains and each one of the different kingdoms, just to give us kind of an overview of what we're going to be talking about a little bit more in detail with the lessons that are going to follow this week. So the first domain we're going to start out with is domain bacteria. This only contains one kingdom, which is kingdom eubacteria. Now, eubacteria are the ones that we think of when we think about getting sick. So if you think about getting strep throat or E. coli or one of those other examples you see down there on the screen, anthrax, those are all eubacteria, the kind that would make us sick. As a reminder, all bacteria are prokaryotes. And remember, prokaryotes have no nucleus, okay? They are unicellular. They're super tiny. Another fun thing about eubacteria is they have cell walls, and their cell walls are made of this interesting sugar. So this is a kind of sugar. It's called peptidoglycan. So that's in their cell walls. That's actually what triggers our immune system to know that they're there and that they've invaded us and that our immune system needs to start trying to protect us and make us get better. So they can be autotrophic, which of course means they're going to make their own food, or they can also be heterotrophs. So there are bacteria that can actually eat other bacteria. The next bacteria kingdom is domain Archaea with the Archaebacteria. Again, we think these are the most ancient organisms on Earth. The reason why we think that is because these guys are something called extremophiles. Okay, these are extreme bacteria, meaning that they like to live in places where nothing else can survive. So they like things that are super hot, super cold, super salty, okay? Places where nothing else is going to live. So they are also prokaryotes. But something that separates them from the other bacteria group, the eubacteria group, is that they do not have this weird sugar in their cell walls. Okay, so they do not have that weird sugar. So some examples of these extremophiles, halophiles, again, this was in that video, that Edpuzzle that you watched. Halophiles love salt, and methanogens can consume methane, produce methane, that kind of thing. Domain Eukarya has the most kingdoms in it. So all of these different organisms are eukaryotes. So that means that they have a nucleus. So that is what's special about all of them. All of the eukaryotes have a nucleus. So this includes group Protista, fungi, and then our plants and our animals. So first, let's run through the protists. Now, the only thing that they really have in common with one another is that they are eukaryotes. The protistans are considered to be the most diverse kingdom because they're weird. They don't really fit in any other group. Now, they have characteristics that are kind of like plants, kind of like animals. There's even one that's kind of like a fungus. All right, so they kind of are like all the different kingdoms, but they don't 100% fit into the other kingdoms. So for example, they can be unicellular or multicellular. Sometimes they live together in a colony, so it's a whole group of them. Again, some are kind of like plants and have cell walls. Some are kind of like animals and they don't have cell walls. They can be autotrophic, they can be heterotrophic. There's this one guy right here called Euglena. This one can be autotrophic and heterotrophic at the same time. So these little protists are kind of strange. They're kind of weird. They're special. Here's an example of some different protists. So this one right here is a paramecium. It's heterotrophic, so it's more animal-like. This one up here is the little blobby one. This one is an amoeba. It causes diseases like amoebic dysentery. It can be in the water supply in some places and give you really bad stomach and tummy problems. This one I think is one of the cutest. This one is called Volvox. And basically it's a bunch of little individual algae that have built this kind of green disco ball around themselves, and they live in a little colony. They just kind of spin around in this little disco ball. They're pretty cute. And this one up here is something called slime mold. It almost looks like a fungus, but what it actually is millions and millions of single-celled organisms, little protists. They kind of secrete this ooze around their little protist bodies, and they kind of roll around and move around in this ooze and goo together. So what's kind of creepy about this is that it could move. So after a few hours, this blob here might end up behind the tree. So again, protists are very diverse. They're very unique. They're a little weird, so they're protists. The fungus. Again, eukaryotes, so they have a nucleus. Most are multicellular. There is a unicellular one right here. This one is yeast. So yeast is a unicellular eukaryote. It's a fungus. It makes your bread rise. So the way that it works is that it consumes all the sugars. So it eats the sugar and produces gas. And then the gas is what makes the bread rise. So fun fact. Fungus also have cell walls, and their cell walls are made of this interesting stuff called chitin. Okay, so chitin is a type of carbohydrate, and weirdly enough, you also find it in the shells of shellfish like shrimp and lobsters. It's kind of weird, and bugs. So very kind of weird that bugs and mushrooms, fungi also have this chitin. Another thing that kind of trips people up is that they're heterotrophs. They do not photosynthesize. They are decomposers. So they're going to have to consume this decomposing matter in order to produce their energy. So they are heterotrophs. For plants, I'm hoping we're all familiar with what plants are, right? You've got mosses, ferns, conifers, then you have some of these pretty things that are coming out now. You've got flowering plants that are starting to make flowers. So again, they're eukaryotes, they're always multicellular, and they are always autotrophs, meaning they are always going to photosynthesize. They also have cell walls, and their cell walls are made of this stuff here called cellulose. For our animal kingdom, again, I'm hoping we're familiar with what animals are. So they are eukaryotes. They have a nucleus. They're always multicellular. And animals never have cell walls or chloroplasts, right? That would be cool if we could photosynthesize, but we can't. We are heterotrophs, right? Hungry heterotrophs. We have to go out there and we have to eat in order to get food. Now, something that some people may not know is that sponges are actually part of the animal kingdom. They're one of the most primitive animals. So we'll talk more about that when we get into the details about the animal kingdom. Thanks everyone for tuning in to the notes on classification and the kingdoms. Hopefully everything made sense. If you do have any questions, please let me know. You can send me an email or you can post a question or comment on Google Classroom underneath this lesson. Just make sure you're either selecting a public comment or a private comment, depending upon if you want it to be public or private. Also, please let me know how this format worked for you, if everyone was able to view the video, if you weren't able to view the video, if it had some glitches in it. I tried a couple different formats, and I'm hoping that this one was the winner. Well, thank you again for tuning in. I hope you all have a great day.